College football playoff rankings just came out. SMU is in, Alabama is out. And I think the Crimson Tide only have themselves to blame for not getting into the college football playoff, because I understand the argument that the SEC is significantly more difficult than the ACC. I understand that argument. But I'll die on this hill. I've said it time and time again. If you have to argue your strength of schedule, that is not a winning argument. It's not an argument for people who have won their way into something, that have earned something. It is used by those who are grasping at straws, trying to figure out somehow, some way, how they are going to say, hey, actually, we're better than this team or that team or whatever, because you haven't earned it. And Alabama didn't earn it. If Alabama had one loss, like SMU did going into an ACC championship game, Alabama is 100% in over SMU. If Alabama only had two losses and it was 10-2 Alabama versus 11-2 SMU, there's not a case to be made. But when Alabama's losses are to Vanderbilt and Oklahoma, who are two not good teams, and SMU's losses are to 10-win Clemson and 9-win BYU, and hell, BYU might have been a 10-win team too. I'll pull that up real quick. Was BYU 10-2 but missed out on the Big 12 championship? Because, yeah, SMU's two losses are to teams with 10 wins, each of them, 10 wins. Sorry about your luck, Alabama, but you lost to a bad Oklahoma team, and you didn't get lost. You got embarrassed on national TV. You lost to Vanderbilt. With such an unprecedented win, their damn students ripped the goalposts out, marched down Broadway in Nashville, and threw it into the Cumberland River. You've only got yourself to blame. So I think Alabama is better than SMU? I do. Yeah, I would think that if they were to play on a neutral field, that Alabama would be favored probably by 10.5. But I'm of the impression, and I've said this before, and I'll say it again, that I think you have to do most deserving instead of best teams. Because best team is, for the most part, completely subjective. Where most deserving is one team made their conference championship game. The other didn't. The other lost to bad teams in their conference. And I can't just look past that simply because your conference is real difficult to play in. Because if it was that horrendous to play in, you wouldn't have lost to a bad Oklahoma team and a bad Vanderbilt team. So while I sympathize with Alabama, because have they shown that they are one of the best teams in the country? Yeah, I think so. To me, I hate the idea of using the eye test because it throws out everything. It throws out the entire regular season. It throws out, hey, disregard everything that has happened between the lines. Alabama recruits better than SMU does. Therefore, Alabama's a better team. At some point, the results on the field have to matter. And that's my biggest gripe, I think, with the college football playoff as a whole. Because when you look at the bracket, they have made it really clear that head-to-head matchups matter, right? For a while there, it was this jumbled mess of Alabama, Ole Miss, Georgia, because Alabama had beaten Georgia, but Georgia lost to Ole Miss, and and Tennessee had beaten Alabama, but Tennessee lost to Georgia, and so it was this convoluted mess. But the way it was put out was like, hey, because this team won, they're going to go above that team. So I think you can go overboard on we don't want to penalize somebody for playing in a conference championship game. But Ohio State was ranked above Penn State because Ohio State had beaten Penn State. And then Penn State loses. So now they have virtually identical records, virtually identical resumes, except Ohio State had won against Penn State. So the highest Penn State could be was 5, but Ohio State had beaten them. I have no problem really with Texas being at number 5. I thought Notre Dame might be there just because they have the one loss. And when you have one loss and Texas has 2 losses now to the same team where they've now had 2 cracks at it to prove they are the best team in the country or the second best team in the country and haven't done that yet, I thought maybe Notre Dame goes to number 5. But they don't. Notre Dame is 7. Penn State is 6. So it's after your conference champions of Oregon, Georgia, Boise State, Arizona State taking spots 1 through 4. Texas 5, Penn State 6, Notre Dame 7, Ohio State 8, Tennessee 9, Indiana 10, SMU 11, and Clemson 12. My initial reaction to that is it couldn't be an easier path to the semifinals for Texas. You get Clemson, who obviously the committee doesn't think very, very highly of. They have them at number 16 in the rankings, despite just beating SMU last night, which is the whole thing is weird to me. For the first 14 weeks, everything matters. And that's not fair because the committee has only been ranking them for a couple of weeks. But head-to-head matchups matter. Head-to-head matchups matter. Head-to-head matchups matter. And then the very next day, it's like, well, head-to-head, man, they don't really matter all that much. Because I think they know that if we put Clemson at 11, which I thought they would. I thought that they would put Clemson at 11 above SMU. I thought SMU would be number 12. Then you have the argument of like, well, then you dropped Alabama and blah, 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 and they don't want to have to deal with that. I think overall what the committee did was pretty defensible. All things considered. Clemson could argue that they deserved the 4 seed. They didn't. When you look at how they were seeded after Oregon and Georgia, Boise State had 1 loss, so they got the 3. Arizona State had 2 losses, so they got the 4. Clemson had 3 losses, so they got the 5th and final automatic. They were the 5th conference champion that got the automatic placement. And it goes along with what I've said for a really long time is that when there are differing numbers in the win column, whoever's got that lower number is going to get preferential treatment like 9 times out of 10. The only place you see it here is Texas has 2 losses. Penn State now has 2 losses, and Notre Dame has 1. But if Notre Dame doesn't want to join a conference, you're going to have to deal with that. Notre Dame's never going to have that 13th data point unless they start playing Hawaii every year. It's just not it's not an apples to apples thing. But Texas has an easy path to the semifinals because Clemson is obviously viewed as not a juggernaut. Arizona State was picked to finish last in their own conference. Now they've won their way to the number 4 seed in the college football playoff, and that is a story that deserves all the praise, attention, etc., because it is impressive. It really, truly, honestly is. What Kenny Dillingham has done, they deserve a lot of praise. But Texas will be a 2-touchdown favorite against Arizona. Easily. So, that's an easy path for Texas to the semifinals. I think it's also an easy path for Penn State to the semifinals. And if they don't make the semifinals, I think there are going to be big question marks about James Franklin and whether, because if they lose to SMU in the first round, the knock on James Franklin has been he doesn't win big games. It's like 2-14 in those big time games. Had a chance to win a Big Ten championship last night. Didn't. I don't think there's anything wrong with them not winning last night. Oregon's the number 1 team in the country, the only undefeated team. They won fair and square. And Penn State played a pretty good game. But you get SMU and Boise State in the first 2 rounds, potentially, in the college football playoff. There's really no excuses if you don't make the semifinals. The other kind of immediate reaction looking at the board is, one, a Indiana-Notre Dame game should be really interesting, and a Notre Dame-Georgia game could be even more interesting. On top of Ohio State-Tennessee should be an absolute barn burner, but they got no favors being put directly into the number 1 team in Oregon. And so I understand, by the way, quick sidebar, I understand the idea that immediately after looking at those teams that get the buys, the thought is, we got to change this. I don't think it's going to be changed. The conferences want the conference championship games to matter. And for the conference championship games to matter, there has to be a reward in the college football playoff. So that's not going to change. But I also think it's important to note that when that was put into place, when this system was devised, there were 5 power conferences. So, for instance, it would be number 1 Oregon. Conceivably, Oregon goes undefeated in the Pac-12. Then number 2, Georgia. Either Ohio State or Penn State. And then Iowa State as the, or Clemson as the 4 teams that get a bye instead of Boise State and Arizona State, because Arizona State would have been in the Pac-12 and probably conceivably wouldn't have beat Oregon. So it's important to note that while there's 5 guaranteed slots and there are 4 buys for the conference champions, we see the faults and the flaws in that system in year number 1, which probably isn't a bad thing, but it is important to note that there were 5 power conferences when this was devised. When they thought this up, it was, okay, Arizona State will be the number 5 seed, not Arizona State will be the number 4 seed, or Boise State will be the number 6 seed, or the 6th conference champion to get a bye, and probably the number 12 seed. Because if there are 5 conference champions from Power 5 conferences, the likelihood that Boise State gets a bye is about slim to none. So I think that's important to know. But overall, I think what happened is defensible. Alabama only has Alabama to blame for not getting into the college football playoff. The idea that they simply deserve a pass for what happened on the field at Oklahoma and at Vanderbilt, because the SEC is really hard. Yeah, every conference is really hard to go on the road and win in conference play. Alabama lost 3 conference games. Alabama only has Alabama to blame for not getting in. The idea that they simply deserve the benefit of the doubt, throw the outcome out the window because they're Alabama and SMU. Like I say often in my personal life, we often judge ourselves by our intentions and others by their actions. Alabama is essentially wanting to be judged by the strength of their schedule, despite what happened on the field. And SMU's argument is, we won the games we were supposed to win outside of the ACC championship game. We lost fewer times than Alabama did. We won 10 games. They did not. And when the argument is, look at our resume because of what we've won, and Alabama's argument is, look at our resume because of who we lost to, they're really hard to play against. I think that's a losing proposition like 9 times out of 10. It just is. When your argument is, this loss is actually a good loss. There is no good loss. You either win or you don't. And the wins should be celebrated and praised, and the losses should be looked at as, hey, this is not a good thing. And when you try to start turning in well, this is actually a good loss, to me, there's no such thing. So sorry, Alabama. I'm sorry you didn't get the benefit of the doubt. I'm sorry that the committee in year number 1 says, hey, I don't think we can penalize teams for playing conference championships to the point of taking them out of having the opportunity to prove that they are one of the 12 best teams in the country. I don't think we can do that. And I don't think that you can view that as a negative thing overall. The only argument I would have is that should be the one thing that's a punishment. If Penn State loses to Oregon by 59 points yesterday, does Penn State deserve to be the 6th seed? I don't know. Does Penn State still deserve to host a playoff game despite losing the Big Ten championship game? That's a different discussion for a different day. I just would say, for so long, head-to-head matchups matter when resumes were pretty close to each other. Clemson beats SMU, and literally the next day, they rank SMU above Clemson. Ohio State beat Penn State a few weeks ago, and Penn State is ranked above Ohio State. Those are kind of my only gripes with overall with the playoff bracket. Want to know your thoughts? Drop them in the comments down below. Would love to hear your perspective on what you think about the college football playoff bracket. That'll do it for today's episode of the Daily Huddle. Appreciate you making us a part of your day, however it is, wherever it is you're doing so. If you're watching on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. Make sure you're getting all the great college football content we're pumping out. If you're listening on the podcast feed, drop a 5-star review. It goes a long way in helping out the channel. I'll see you tomorrow for another episode of the Daily Huddle.